Well, hello, gang. Welcome to this episode of the Ministry Show. And Pam and I, are both so thankful that you are here today and appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to not only tune in, but listen. And it's our goal to really give some good application. And so the last several shows have been about recruiting and training. And it strikes me that those two things in particular can be a little bit more scientific because recruiting, even if you're a bad recruiter, well, you recruit 2 people out of 10 or something like that. Well, if you know you need to get 10 people, well, then you know that you got to talk to 50. And you could just do the math and you can get the people that you need. And with training, at least 90% of training is preparation and picking the right topic to train on. It's only about 10% of that that's about the actual presentation because you're presenting primarily to people that you know.
Right.
But placement, which we're going to talk about this week and next week, there's a lot more art to that than science. So it's quite a bit different skill set to place properly than it is to recruit and train. But we want to dive into finding faithful people and getting them placed properly. You can see the show outline right there in front of you on a couple of different key points that we're going to talk about. I want to make sure that we all understand that when it comes to placing people, the proof is in the pudding, and the pudding is longevity.
Right.
We know that people are placed properly when they last a long time. That is a key element to a thriving ministry and for you to have your best year ever. Because if you're constantly having to replace people and you have a constant turnover, it's very difficult, maybe even impossible, to gain the traction that you need to have the ministry that you want for not only yourself, but your people as well.
Yeah, totally agree. And we also need to get good at getting the right people into the right role. For some of us, it's really intuitive. You can look at people and watch them and go, wow, I see the gift of whatever that gift is in them. And sometimes people aren't even aware of the gifts that they have. So being able to call those gifts out and give them an opportunity to serve. For others, it may be that it's not so intuitive for you and you may need to read books or get some training in that area. But for those that it is intuitive, I find that you don't need to read as much. Haven't you found that, Chris?
Well, that could definitely be true. Here's what I find with people like me anyway. I tend to be a little bit impatient. You're looking at me funny. I tend to be a lot impatient and want things right away. When it comes to placing people properly, patience is a key.
It is.
We need to have the patience to get to know them. We have to have the patience for an opening, a slot or whatever to open up. In this case, placing people, patience is your friend.
It's good.
One of our primary jobs when it comes to placing people is to find faithful people. I know early in my pastoral career, I looked for talented people that I thought could take things off my plate or lighten my load.
Right.
Like, I hate to admit that, but how selfish is that? Well, I found out pretty quickly, again, one of those scar tissue things, Pam,
Right.
that that's not really the best way to go about this. So what do we do? Well, Paul instructs Timothy. I love that 1st and 2nd Timothy because Paul is specifically talking to a spiritual leader instead of Christians, broad-based. It's like Timothy's a spiritual leader, and he gives specific instructions to a spiritual leader. And one of those is find faithful people. When I find faithful people, I don't need to worry about their talent because they can become more talented.
Right.
But if I find talented people who are not faithful, then my ministry falls apart because they don't show up or they don't do what they said or they're always chasing the grass is greener somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm reading your mail right now, I apologize, but that's been my experience. I think that one of the key reasons that Paul tells Timothy to find and invest in faithful people is that that investment will pay dividends over time.
Mm-hmm.
But here's what I understand about investing. You get the right investment, and then all of a sudden your investment pays off on the interest that you didn't do any work for.
Right.
Because you got a little bit of interest, and then you get interest on that interest, and then you get interest on that interest, and then you get interest on that interest. And pretty soon, everything compiles, and it's like, how did $100 turn into $400? Well, that same thing happens when you find faithful people and invest in them in ministry. there's a compiling effect that takes place. It almost seems like it's a springboard. It's really not. It's just doing what the Bible says, finding faithful people, and faithfulness breeds faithfulness.
I've heard you talk, Chris, about personal investment. What does that look like when you are personally investing? Because you can't, like we've talked about, you can't invest in everybody, but you do have those key people. What does that look like? What do you look for in those people that you're going to personally invest into?
Great question, Pam. I think a couple things. Number one, the first thing we have to understand as spiritual leaders, and now that might sound like a big, heavy term or something like you have to be a pastor to be a spiritual leader. That's not true. There's a concept in the New Testament called the priesthood of believers. If you're a believer and you've got one person that you're working with, then you're a leader of that person. The key is this. We as leaders need to understand that God is expecting a return. Read the second half of Luke 19, all about the parable of the talents. I don't want to get into a Bible lesson here, but just read it and you'll find out that the one that didn't bring a return, I think the term is wicked, you wicked servant.
Right.
Like he was upset about it. And so we do need to bring a return. With that in mind, I can't get a return if I'm unwilling to invest. There's this thing called the law of the harvest. And I can't expect to get a harvest of corn if I'm not willing to invest the seed in the soil in order to let God's natural processes take over. Just like the farmer can't make the corn grow, the farmer doesn't make the corn grow. God makes the corn grow. The farmer prepares the soil and plants the seed. Well, you and I are the same way. If you take that, then how do I determine who to invest in and where to spend my most time? It's what result are they getting? It's Luke 19, second half. Well, I'm going to take from the one and give it to the one that multiplied it.
Right.
Doesn't that make sense?
Sure.
Just as my professional investors, as I mentioned to you, they don't let an investment that's doing poorly stay put. They transfer that money. And sure, you might lose some money. Well, ministry is very similar to that. And we have to be able to be wise enough to where are you getting a return and go invest in those people. Now, sometimes that's a bit intimidating. Sometimes we think, well, they don't need my help. Well, they might not need your help. They need your friendship. They need your wisdom. They just need time with you. Anyway, that's how I do it. It's like, I'm getting a return. Well, let me invest more where I'm getting a return. Just like my financial investors do for me. So great question.
Good analogy. I like that. Thanks.
Yeah. Another thing about this placement thing is understand that birds of a feather flock together. In other words, faithfulness attracts faithfulness. And so, Pam, you've experienced this in ministry as I have. If we have a team of people and somebody joins that team and they're unfaithful, are the people happy or
No.
what happens?
Frustration. I mean, it's just a ripple effect. It's a ripple effect.
Yeah.
For sure.
It's almost like putting a rotten apple in a barrel. It's going to ruin the whole barrel.
Right.
So we got to remove that apple quickly. Faithful people want to be around faithful people. You'll see it over and over and over again in ministry. And that's a good thing because as our ministries grow, we get consumed with the urgency and the, kind of the tornadic activity sometimes of ministry. And we need the help of plenty of other people. If we will be disciplined enough to look for, find, and recruit faithful people, those faithful people will pay dividends over and over and over again.
Well, and we need to be faithful too as leaders. And, we have to do what we say we're going to do.
I always overlook the obvious, Pam. Thanks for bringing
Right,
that up.
yeah.
Yep, you go, girl.
There are times when life happens and you may have committed to something, but something comes up where it's out of your control. And so you need to attend to that. If you can't do what you say you're going to do, go get someone who can fill your shoes, somebody who can go and be that replacement for you at that time so that your word remains your word.
Beautiful. So one of the things I've noticed about our culture has shifted more towards is that this idea of reliability, faithfulness, dependability, for some reason, is taken a lower spot on the rung of importance. And so I've learned over the years that I actually have to teach my people to become faithful.
Hmm.
I've had tons of people that are like, oh, you really meant that? Like, I need to show up on time? Yes, you do. And here's why. Or, man, I committed to this and you really needed me to do that? Yeah. And so sometimes people, especially when they're new to ministry or new to you as a leader, they are going to conduct their affairs the way that they're used to unless you train them well. How do you train them well? You let them know what's expected, but you have to also understand the culture that they're coming from.
Right.
That's why it's important to explain and help people know and understand that faithfulness, reliability, dependability, I'm kind of using those three words synonymously, is absolutely essential in ministry because we are in the most serious enterprise the world has ever seen. That's God's kingdom. Literally, spiritual lives, eternity hangs in the balance based on if we fulfill our responsibilities or not. I'm not saying be that hardcore with people to start with, but they needed to learn and know and understand that the church is part of God's kingdom, and God's kingdom is the big deal. My church within that is not really that big of a deal. I mean, I think it's a big deal. I like just having a kid or something. But, what really matters is that we're part of something bigger than our own church, and that is God's kingdom. When we look at things that way, it's helping others become faithful, which that'll do a couple things because faithfulness and dependability, reliability leads people to peace of mind. It really does. It's like, and I've heard this from so many people who were like, yeah, when I figured out that you were really serious about and passionate about the work that you do and all that, then that inspired me. But now that I'm following in those footsteps, there's real peace of mind and a satisfaction that comes along with that because they're making a contribution to the most important enterprise ever created.
Right.
Like that's a big win for people. And when we can help our volunteers, our staff, whoever it might be, recognize and realize that, man, their self-esteem is elevated. Again, that self-satisfaction that, oh, I did my part.
Hmm.
I mean, I want to do my part.
Hmm.
I'm sure you want to do your part. And I know you listening want to do your part, or you wouldn't be listening to this kind of a show. So don't take for granted that people will be dependable. Teach them how to be dependable.
And Chris, I love what you said about the kingdom focus. I've been in ministry for years as a volunteer and full-time staff. I think I can count one time when the leader, over our particular ministry that was our mentor, mentioned kingdom. Otherwise, it was always about that local church, always about us. And boy, what a difference it made to have that bigger view of the impact we can make in the kingdom.
I like that you brought that up, Pam, and it's that both and thing.
Hmm.
But it does need to be about your church, but that church is connected to something so much bigger
Sure.
that it's really good to express that. Matter of fact, when we help others be faithful, I have this iceberg kind of metaphor. You can see the picture there. People only see a fraction of your ministry, exposure of the ministry. They don't see the behind the scenes. They don't know that it takes 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 hours a time to do 1 hour of ministry on a Sunday. Oh, and by the way, not by just one person, but by a team of people. So you're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of man hours that go into just a simple Sunday service, for example. So most of our ministry is hidden underwater, and the faithfulness is hidden underwater. People don't see it, but they experience the result of that faithfulness. We're not going to get kudos for being faithful.
Right.
I mean, we will one day
Sure.
in heaven if we are faithful. I'm not trying to take away that verse that says, well done, thou good and faithful servant.
Mm.
What I'm saying is within our world, people expect that
Sure.
from ministry leaders, but the way that we get known as that as ministry leaders is teach that faithfulness or that dependability to others.
Right. I think about even in marriages, Chris, you see couples, maybe they've been married, 20, 30, 40 years, and you don't see the work that's gone into that marriage. You just expect them to be faithful because they're married to one another.
Yeah.
Nothing ripples until maybe somebody's not faithful or runs into, where there's an issue in the marriage, and then all attention goes on that marriage, where we should be celebrating people that are staying committed and faithful, especially nowadays.
Yeah, that's a powerful metaphor that you just used, but accurate as well. Let's talk just little bit about consistency versus quality, or kind of the all-star type ministry versus just a consistent plodding along in ministry. There's a famous movie that highlighted a famous baseball team. It was called Moneyball. Basically, they proved that consistency trumped quality in baseball. I know for a fact that consistency trumps quality in ministry. What they proved, Billy Beane, I think the guy's name was, did all the statistical analysis. Instead of getting power hitters and, the big flamboyant kind of people that could get more home runs than others, what he looked for was people that could get on base.
Right.
How do you get on base in ministry? Because you can't score runs in baseball if you don't get on base. It's impossible. And so they figured that out. Well, the same thing applies to ministry, where this consistency or this faithfulness trumps quality. So don't look for all-stars, look for consistency. Who can get on base? Who can get on base? And then why does McDonald's make money?
Consistent.
It's not like a quality hamburger, especially today. I mean, I've been all over the country and all these superstar hamburger shops opening up all over, gourmet and all of this. But McDonald's isn't closing down.
Right.
It's not the best, but it's consistent.
You're not saying that quality doesn't matter, right?
Yeah, I'm not saying that quality doesn't matter, because you can go to McDonald's, you get cold fries, and it's like, that's kind of a bummer, but they'll give you fresh fries. But there is a level of quality in every area. There's a quality level of expectation in size of church. There's a quality expectation within the culture. And we can't just pretend that there's no quality line. Like McDonald's would go out of business if they sold cold hamburgers all the time.
Right.
Because it doesn't meet the quality level. So hit that quality line, and if you don't know what it is, take a Sunday off and go visit 2-3 churches in your area, and you'll know what the quality line is in children's ministry and youth ministry and worship and so on.
Another thing, too, when you talk about consistency, we don't know, Chris, what's going on in the spiritual realm. I've talked about this before, how we not only can protect ourselves, but protect others against the unknown. If we're not consistency, if we're not a person of our word, if we're not there, if we're not on our post, or on guard like we said we're going to be, and something were to happen, we just don't know what's going on in the spirit world.
There's a great value in people seeing that consistency, and they will be drawn to it.
Right.
And then, just as I mentioned, birds of a feather flock together. Well, there's safety in numbers as well.
It's true.
So here, let's just talk real quick about an action item for today. We want you to do a faithfulness exercise. And here's what it is. Not looking at other people, but get a mirror, look at yourself, and ask yourself, are you being faithful in the little things and the big things? Have you broken any promises, either intentionally or unintentionally? Are you keeping your word as it relates to time? Are you showing up on time? Not only in your ministry, but in your home.
Right.
If it's not consistent, or if you're not keeping your word, then adjust. Make a time adjustment, make a personal adjustment, or whatever it might be. And then people count on faithful people.
Yeah, they do. Well, and I think, too, looking in the mirror is great, but for some of us, maybe we need others to bring to our attention, did I ever let you down unintentionally? And asking for that feedback, I think, is great.
Yeah, I mean, we all have blind spots.
Yeah.
So if you're finding you think that you're faithful and reliable, but you do these 2 quick questions and you go, oh, I'm late all the time, or I'm this all the time, or whatever. Well, then go ask a few people, just like what you said. And it's like, oh, maybe they'll be honest with you and tell you how disruptive it is for their schedule for you to consistently not be consistent.
Right.
Hey, just a real quick shout out to our sponsors. You can see who they are right there. Aware 3, the You Only Die Once course, Catalyst Creative, and North Coast. Man, thank you guys so much for sponsoring us. And I want to really thank these guys over at the You Only Die Once course, because, there's an art to living. I'm finding out there's an art to dying. Those guys, they got it dialed in, and they can help you with your ministry. Guys, thank you again so much for being part of these episodes of the Ministry Show. Again, we hope that they prompt goodness from you, help you get a little bit better. We'll see you next week. God bless you until then. Bye-bye.